The clock on the bathroom wall showed 3:17 a.m. when Lisa finally stopped crying. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. The woman staring back had hollow eyes and a fresh bruise blooming across her left cheek. She reached for the makeup bag with shaking hands, the same routine she'd perfected over the past 3 years. Foundation first, then concealer, extra powder to make sure nothing showed through. She had become an expert at hiding the truth. "You're so clumsy," she whispered to herself, practicing the lie she would tell her coworkers tomorrow. Walked right into the cabinet door. The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but they were easier to say than the truth. The truth was that her husband Michael had lost his temper again. It started with something small, like it always did. She had forgotten to record his favorite TV show while he was at work. Such a tiny mistake, but in their house, tiny mistakes had big consequences. "You never think about anyone but yourself," he had screamed, his face turning red with anger. "I work all day to pay for this house, and you can't even do one simple thing right." Lisa had tried to apologize, explaining that she had been busy helping her elderly neighbor Mrs. Peterson with her groceries. But Michael didn't want to hear explanations. He wanted someone to blame for his bad day, his stress at work, his disappointments in life. And Lisa had been his target for so long now that she barely remembered what it felt like to be treated with kindness. The argument had escalated quickly. Michael threw his dinner plate against the wall, sending pasta and sauce splattering across the white paint. Then came the words that cut deeper than any physical blow. "You're worthless," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "No wonder your own family doesn't call anymore. Even they know what a failure you are." That's when Lisa had made the mistake of defending herself. She had found her voice for just a moment and said, "That's not fair, Michael. You know my family stopped calling because you—" She never got to finish the sentence. Michael's hand moved so fast she didn't have time to duck. Now, hours later, she sat on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tile wall. Michael was snoring loudly in their bedroom, sleeping peacefully as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just destroyed another piece of her soul. Lisa pulled her knees to her chest and tried to remember the woman she used to be, before Michael. Before the marriage that had slowly turned into a prison. She used to laugh easily. She used to have friends who called just to chat. She used to dream about traveling the world, maybe becoming a teacher, helping kids learn to read. All those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now. Her phone buzzed softly on the counter. A text message from her old college roommate Amy, who lived all the way across the country in Portland. "Thinking about you tonight. I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. That teaching job I told you about is still open. The school really needs someone with your experience. Just saying, there's always a place for you here if you want a fresh start." Lisa stared at the message for a long time. Amy had been sending similar texts for months, ever since Lisa had accidentally let slip during a phone call that things at home weren't perfect. Amy was one of the few people from her old life who still tried to stay in touch, despite Michael's obvious disapproval whenever Lisa talked to anyone from her past. "You don't need those people," he would say. "I'm all you need. We're a team, remember?" But sitting there on the cold bathroom floor at 3 a.m, Lisa didn't feel like part of any team. She felt alone and scared and tired of being afraid in her own home. She scrolled through her phone, looking at Amy's previous messages. Photos of Portland's beautiful scenery. Stories about the elementary school where Amy worked as a counselor. Updates about the small apartment complex where Amy lived and how there was always a vacant unit available for someone looking to start over. Start over. The words echoed in Lisa's mind. Was that even possible? After 8 years of marriage, could she really just walk away? The thought terrified her. But for the first time in years, it also gave her a tiny spark of hope. Lisa stood up slowly and looked at herself in the mirror again. This time, instead of seeing a victim, she tried to see a woman who still had choices. A woman who didn't have to spend the rest of her life walking on eggshells, afraid to breathe too loudly or forget to record a stupid TV show. She opened the medicine cabinet and pulled out an old jewelry box that had belonged to her grandmother. Hidden inside, underneath her mother's wedding ring that she couldn't bring herself to wear anymore, was a small stack of $20 bills, her secret emergency fund. She had been saving $5 or $10 here and there for over a year, taking cash back at the grocery store and hiding it away. $260. Not much, but maybe enough to buy a plane ticket. Lisa's heart started beating faster. Was she really thinking about leaving? About getting on a plane and flying across the country to start a new life? The idea seemed crazy, impossible, terrifying. But, as she looked at her bruised face in the mirror, she realized that staying felt even more terrifying. She tiptoed into the bedroom where Michael was still snoring. Moving as quietly as possible, she pulled a small suitcase from the closet. Just one bag. She couldn't take much without risking waking him up, and besides, most of her belongings held memories she'd rather leave behind anyway. A few changes of clothes, her grandmother's jewelry, the photo of her parents that Michael had made her take down because he said it made the house look cluttered, her teaching certificate carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve, and Amy's last letter, the one where she had included the school's contact information and written, "They're looking for someone special, someone who cares about kids and wants to make a real difference. Sound like anyone you know?" By the time the sun started to rise, Lisa had made her decision. Michael would be leaving for his business trip to Chicago in a few hours. He always traveled for work on Thursdays, staying overnight and coming back Friday evening. That would give her almost 2 days before he realized she was gone. She waited until she heard his shower running, then quietly called the airline. There was a flight to Portland, leaving that afternoon. With the money from her secret fund and what she could take from their joint account before Michael thought to freeze it, she could just barely afford a ticket. "One way," she told the ticket agent, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, ma'am." "One way to Portland," she said, louder this time. "I won't be coming back." As she hung up the phone, Lisa felt something she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in so long, she was making a choice for herself. She was taking control of her own story. She just had to find the courage to see it through. Lisa's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she walked through the airport terminal. The place was huge and overwhelming, with people rushing in every direction. Announcements echoed from speakers she couldn't see, and electronic boards flashed departure times that seemed to change every few minutes. She had never traveled alone before. Michael had always handled everything when they went on their rare vacations. He picked the flights, managed the tickets, told her where to go and when. Now, clutching her boarding pass like a lifeline, Lisa felt completely lost. The morning had been a blur of terror and determination. She'd waited until Michael left for his business trip, her heart pounding every time he looked in her direction, but he seemed distracted, focused on his phone calls and complaining about his early flight to Chicago. "I'll be back Friday night," he had said, not even looking at her as he grabbed his suitcase. "Make sure you pick up my dry cleaning while I'm gone. And don't forget to water the plants on the deck." Lisa had nodded and smiled, the same fake smile she'd perfected over the years. Of course, have a safe trip. The moment his car disappeared down the street, she had grabbed her hidden suitcase and called a taxi. No time to think, no time to change her mind. If she hesitated for even a second, she knew she would lose her courage. At the bank, she emptied their joint savings account, her hands trembling as she withdrew $3,000 in cash. It felt like stealing, even though legally it was her money too. But Michael controlled everything, and this was the first time in years she had touched their savings without asking his permission first. The bank teller, a young woman with kind eyes, had asked if everything was okay. "I'm taking a trip," Lisa had said, which wasn't exactly a lie. A surprise trip. Now standing in the middle of Denver International Airport with a one-way ticket to Portland and everything she owned in a single bag, the reality of what she was doing hit her like a wave. She was actually leaving. After 8 years of marriage, she was walking away from the only life she'd known as an adult. The airport was busier than she'd expected for a Thursday afternoon. Families with small children, business travelers typing on laptops, teenagers with backpacks bigger than themselves. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. Everyone except her. Lisa found a quiet corner near her gate and pulled out her phone. Amy had sent 3 more encouraging texts since that morning. I'm so proud of you for taking this step. I've been praying for you to find the strength. The apartment next to mine is still empty. It's small but cozy. And Mrs. Chen, who owns the building, is super sweet. Text me your flight info when you can. I'll pick you up. P at the airport. We're going to figure this out together. Reading Amy's messages made Lisa's eyes fill with tears. When was the last time someone had been truly excited to see her? When was the last time anyone had offered to help without expecting something in return? Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Her blood went cold. What if Michael had come home early? What if he'd discovered she was gone and somehow tracked her down? She let it go to voicemail, her heart racing. But when she played the message, it was just a robocall about her car's extended warranty. She laughed out loud, a sound that felt strange coming from her throat. When was the last time she'd laughed about anything? Flight 447 to Portland, now boarding all passengers. Lisa looked up at the announcement board. That was her flight. She gathered her bag and walked toward what she thought was the right gate, following a small crowd of other passengers. Her boarding pass felt damp from her sweaty palms. The gate area was crowded and confusing. There were several flights boarding at the same time, and the noise made it hard to hear the announcements clearly. Lisa joined what looked like the right line, checking and rechecking her boarding pass. "Boarding pass, please," said the flight attendant, a tired-looking woman who seemed to be handling multiple flights at once. Lisa handed over her ticket, noticing that the woman barely glanced at it before scanning it with her handheld device. The scanner beeped, and the flight attendant looked confused for a moment. That's strange," she muttered, then scanned it again. This time it worked. "Okay, you're all set. Have a good flight." Lisa walked down the jet bridge, her legs feeling like jelly. This was really happening. In a few hours, she would be in Portland, starting a completely new chapter of her life. Amy would be waiting for her. She would have a place to sleep, a friend to help her figure out what came next. She found her seat 24B next to the window. Perfect. She could look out at the clouds and pretend she was flying toward a completely different world, which, in a way, she was. The man in the seat next to her looked like he was around her age, maybe a little younger. He had kind eyes and was reading a photography magazine. He glanced up when she sat down and gave her a polite smile before going back to his reading. Lisa was grateful he didn't try to start a conversation. She wasn't ready to talk to anyone, yet. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Lisa closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Portland would be like. Amy had sent her so many pictures over the years. Mountains and forests, the ocean nearby, coffee shops on every corner. It sounded like paradise compared to the suburban prison she was leaving behind. The plane lifted off, and Lisa watched her old life disappear beneath the clouds. Somewhere down there, Michael was probably sitting in a business meeting, completely unaware that his wife was flying across the country. He wouldn't discover she was gone until tomorrow night at the earliest. What would he do when he found out? Would he be angry? Worried? Or would he just be annoyed that she had disrupted his perfectly controlled life? For the first time, Lisa realized she didn't really care what Michael thought. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. The flight seemed to pass quickly. Lisa dozed off somewhere over the mountains, exhausted from the emotional stress of the morning. She dreamed about teaching again, about standing in front of a classroom full of eager young faces. In her dream, she was confident and happy, the woman she used to be before she learned to make herself small and quiet. She woke up when the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Portland. The weather is partly cloudy with a temperature of 58 degrees. Local time is 4:30 p.m. Thank you for flying with us today." Lisa's heart started racing with excitement. This was it. She was really doing this. In just a few minutes, she would be on the ground in a new city, ready to start over. But as the plane descended through the clouds, something didn't look right outside her window. The landscape below looked different from Amy's photos. More trees, but different kinds of trees. And where was the ocean that was supposed to be nearby? Lisa pressed her face to the window, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The buildings looked wrong too. This didn't look like the Portland Amy had described. A cold feeling of dread started to spread through her stomach. "Excuse me," she said to the man sitting next to her. "This is Portland, Oregon, right?" He looked at her with confusion. "No, this is Portland, Maine. We're landing at Portland International Jetport." The world seemed to stop spinning. Lisa stared at him, unable to process what he'd just said. "Maine?" she whispered. "Yeah, the other side of the country from Oregon. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Lisa looked down at her boarding pass with new eyes. There it was, clear as day. PWM. Portland, Maine. Not PDX, Portland, Oregon. She had gotten on the wrong plane. Instead of flying toward her new life with Amy, she had somehow ended up 3,000 miles in the opposite direction. She was alone in a state she'd never visited, with limited money and no one to call for help. As the plane touched down on the runway, Lisa felt her carefully planned escape crumbling around her. She had finally found the courage to leave her old life behind, only to end up completely lost in a place she'd never intended to go. The man next to her was watching her with growing concern. "Miss, are you sure you're okay? You really don't look well." Lisa couldn't even begin to explain. How do you tell a stranger that you've just made the biggest mistake of your life? That you're fleeing an abusive marriage and accidentally ended up on the wrong side of the country? "I think," she said quietly, "I'm in the wrong place entirely." Lisa sat frozen in her airplane seat, staring at the boarding pass that had betrayed her. The letters PWM seemed to mock her from the small print. Portland, Maine. Not Portland, Oregon. Not Amy. Not the new life she had planned. The man sitting next to her was still watching her with concern. He had closed his photography magazine and was leaning slightly toward her, as if he wanted to help but wasn't sure how. "Hey," he said gently. "I don't mean to pry, but you look like you just got some really bad news. Is there anything I can do?" Lisa looked at him properly for the first time. He had dark hair and wore a simple blue sweater that looked comfortable rather than expensive. His face was kind, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Everything about him seemed gentle, so different from the men she was used to dealing with. She started, then stopped. How could she explain this mess to a complete stranger? "I think I made a terrible mistake." "The wrong flight?" he asked, and she nodded miserably. "Happens more often than you'd think, especially in busy airports. Where were you supposed to go?" "Portland, Oregon," she whispered, feeling tears threaten again. "I have a friend there. She was going to pick me up at the airport." The plane had stopped moving and other passengers were starting to gather their belongings. The flight attendant was announcing that they could now use electronic devices and prepare to exit the aircraft. But Lisa felt like she couldn't move. "Oregon's a beautiful state," the man said. "I've done some photography work out there, but hey, Maine's pretty great too. I'm David, by the way. I live here in Portland." "Lisa," she managed to say, though saying her own name felt strange. When was the last time she had introduced herself to someone new? "Nice to meet you, Lisa. Look, I know this is probably scary, but it's not the end of the world. Airlines deal with this kind of thing all the time. They can probably get you on another flight tomorrow, maybe even tonight if you're lucky." Lisa felt a fresh wave of panic. "Tomorrow? But I can't go back. I can't wait until tomorrow." Something in her voice must have revealed more than she intended because David's expression grew more serious. He studied her face carefully and she realized he was probably seeing the faint traces of the bruise she had tried so hard to cover with makeup. "You can't go back," he repeated slowly. "As in, you're not planning to return to wherever you came from?" Lisa looked down at her hands. She was still wearing her wedding ring, that thin gold band that had once meant love and promise but now felt like a chain. Without thinking, she twisted it around her finger, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. "It's complicated," she said. David was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was even gentler than before. "My mom used to twist her wedding ring like that," he said, "when I was a kid, especially after my dad had been drinking. Lisa's eyes snapped up to meet his. There was understanding there, not judgment, not pity, just recognition of something he'd seen before. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize to me," he said firmly. "You have nothing to be sorry for." "But Lisa, if you're trying to get away from something bad, being stuck in the wrong city might not be such a disaster after all." The passengers around them were filing out of the plane now. A flight attendant was walking toward them, probably wondering why they hadn't moved yet. "We should probably get off the plane," David said. "But don't worry about figuring everything out right now, one step at a time, okay?" Lisa nodded and stood up on shaky legs. She grabbed her small suitcase from the overhead compartment, and David helped her navigate through the narrow airplane aisle. His presence beside her felt surprisingly comforting. When was the last time someone had helped her without making her feel like she owed them something in return? The Portland International Jetport was much smaller than the Denver airport, less overwhelming, but also less familiar. Lisa had no idea where she was supposed to go or what she was supposed to do next. "First things first," David said, as if reading her mind. "Let's find the airline counter and see about getting you rebooked to Oregon. Do you have your original confirmation number?" Lisa pulled out her phone and scrolled through her emails. The confirmation was there, along with 17 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. Her heart started racing again. "Problem?" David asked, noticing her expression. "I don't know," she said, staring at the missed calls. "These aren't from anyone I know." She played one of the voicemails and immediately regretted it. It was Michael's voice, but not the calm, controlled tone he used in public. This was his angry voice, the one that made her stomach clench with fear. "Lisa, what the hell do you think you're doing? I came home early and found your note. Are you out of your mind? You can't just leave. We're married. You made promises. Call me back right now or you're going to be sorry." The message ended, and Lisa realized she was trembling. David had heard enough to understand what was happening. "Your husband?" he asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. "How did he get your number? I mean, if you were trying to leave." "It's our shared phone plan," she said miserably. "He can probably track everywhere I go." David frowned. "Okay, that's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world either. First rule of starting over, you get to make your own choices about who gets to contact you." He was right, but the idea of ignoring Michael's calls felt impossible. She had spent so many years responding to his every demand, walking on eggshells to avoid his anger. The thought of deliberately making him mad was terrifying. "I can't just not answer," she said. "You don't understand when he gets angry. He hurts you," David finished gently. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Lisa had never said those words out loud to another person. She had spent years making excuses, minimizing what happened, pretending it wasn't that bad. "Sometimes," she whispered. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was steady and calm. "My mom stayed with my dad for 15 years, he said. "She thought she couldn't leave, thought it was her fault when he got angry. Thought no one would believe her, or that she deserved it somehow. Did she ever—" Lisa couldn't finish the question. "Leave? Yeah, eventually. When I was 16. It was the hardest thing she ever did, but also the best thing. She used to say that leaving saved both our lives." They had reached the airline counter, but Lisa wasn't ready to face rebooking flights or making decisions about where to go next. She felt overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past few hours. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I had this whole plan and now everything's gone wrong. My friend Amy was going to help me find a job, find a place to live. I don't know anyone here. I don't know anything about Maine." David smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Well, you know me now and I know Maine pretty well." "But you don't even know me," Lisa protested. "I'm a complete stranger who got on the wrong plane." "Sometimes strangers are exactly what we need," he said. "Look, I'm not suggesting you trust me with your life story or anything like that, but you need help figuring out your next step and I happen to be free this evening. No strings attached, no expectations. Just one person helping another person who's having a really tough day." Lisa studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation she was used to. Men who offered to help usually wanted something in return, but David's expression was open and honest. He wasn't trying to charm her or impress her. He was just being kind. "Why would you want to help me?" she asked. "Because someone helped my mom when she needed it most," he said simply. "A neighbor who let her use the phone when my dad cut the line. A teacher who noticed the bruises and gave her information about shelters. A lawyer who took her case pro bono. Sometimes people help because they remember what it was like to need help." Lisa felt tears starting again, but this time they weren't tears of fear or despair. They were tears of relief. For the first time in years, someone was offering to help her without making her feel weak or stupid or grateful beyond measure. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay. What do we do first?" David grinned. "First, we get you a new phone number. Then we find you a place to stay tonight. Then we figure out whether you want to catch the next flight to Oregon, or whether maybe ending up in Maine wasn't such a mistake after all." As they walked toward the airline counter together, Lisa realized something had changed inside her. The terrified woman who had boarded the wrong plane was still there, but she was no longer alone. And for the first time in 8 years, that made all the difference. The first thing David did was take Lisa to a small cell phone store near the airport. The young man behind the counter looked bored until David explained that Lisa needed a new number immediately for safety reasons. Something in David's tone made the clerk pay attention, and within an hour Lisa had a completely new phone with a number that Michael could never trace. "Turn the old phone off completely," David advised as they walked back to his car. "Don't even power it on to check messages. That's your old life calling and you don't have to answer anymore." Lisa held the new phone like it was made of gold. Such a simple thing, but it felt like freedom in her pocket. No more jumping every time. It rang, wondering if Michael was checking up on her or getting ready to explode about something she'd forgotten to do. "Where are we going now?" she asked as they drove away from the airport. The Maine countryside looked different from anything she'd seen before. More trees, older houses, everything painted in shades of green she didn't have names for. "There's a place I know," David said. "A bed and breakfast in the old Port District downtown. The owner is a friend of mine. Her name is Mrs. Rodriguez, and she's helped people in situations like yours before." Lisa felt a familiar panic rising. "I don't have much money. I mean, I have some, but not enough for a nice hotel." "Don't worry about that right now," David said. "Let's just see what options we have." The bed and breakfast was in a converted Victorian house painted pale yellow with white trim. Flower boxes lined the windows, and a small sign by the front door read, "Rosewood Inn, Guests Welcome." It looked like the kind of place Lisa had always imagined staying at someday, back when she still allowed herself to dream about traveling. Mrs. Rodriguez was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. She listened carefully as David quietly explained Lisa's situation, not sharing details but making it clear that Lisa was escaping from something dangerous and had ended up in Maine by accident. "Oh dear," Mrs. Rodriguez said, looking at Lisa with genuine concern. "You've had quite a day, haven't you?" Lisa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Well, you're safe now," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "That's the most important thing. As for the room, let's not worry about the usual rates. I have a small room on the 3rd floor that's been empty for weeks. Consider it yours for as long as you need it." "I can pay," Lisa said quickly. "I have money." "I'm sure you do," Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "But right now, you need to save every penny for whatever comes next. The room is yours. No arguments." When Lisa tried to protest, David gently touched her arm. "Let her help," he said quietly. "Some people give help because they want to, not because they expect something back." The concept was so foreign to Lisa that she almost couldn't process it. In her marriage, every favor came with strings attached. Every kindness had a price that would be collected later. But looking at Mrs. Rodriguez's warm smile, Lisa realized that not everyone in the world operated that way. The room was small but perfect, with a window overlooking the harbor and a comfortable chair by a tiny desk. Mrs. Rodriguez brought up fresh towels and a cup of tea, then left Lisa alone to rest and process everything that had happened. But Lisa was too wound up to rest. She stood by the window, watching boats in the harbor and trying to figure out what to do next. She could catch a flight to Oregon tomorrow. Amy would still be there, still willing to help. That had been the original plan, and it was still possible. But something about Portland, Maine felt different. Calmer. David and Mrs. Rodriguez had shown her more genuine kindness in one afternoon than she'd experienced in years. Maybe the wrong plane had actually taken her to exactly the right place. Her new phone buzzed with a text from David. "How are you settling in? No pressure, but if you want company for dinner, I know a great seafood place nearby. My treat." Lisa stared at the message for a long time. When was the last time someone had invited her to dinner without it being an obligation or a manipulation? When was the last time she'd eaten at a restaurant because she wanted to, not because someone else had chosen the place and the time? She texted back, "I'd like that, thank you." The restaurant David chose was small and casual, the kind of place where locals came for fish and chips and conversation. They sat by a window overlooking the harbor, and Lisa found herself actually relaxing for the first time in months. "So," David said after they'd ordered, "tell me about Oregon. What was drawing you there?" Lisa explained about Amy, about the teaching job that might be available, about her dreams of starting over in a place where no one knew her history. "Teaching," David said thoughtfully. "What age group?" "Elementary school," Lisa said, and for the first time in the conversation, her voice became animated. "Second or third grade, ideally. That's when kids are really starting to read on their own, when you can see the whole world opening up for them." "You light up when you talk about it," David observed. "It's obvious you love it." "I used to teach," Lisa admitted. "Before I got married, Michael thought it was a waste of time. Said I should focus on being a good wife instead of trying to fix other people's kids." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but saying them out loud felt important somehow. She was starting to remember the person she used to be, the woman who had dreams and opinions and a career she cared about. "Well, Michael sounds like an idiot," David said bluntly, then immediately looked apologetic. "Sorry, I know he's your husband, but—" "No," Lisa interrupted. "Don't apologize. You're right. He is an idiot, and he's not really my husband anymore, is he? Not if I'm never going back." They ate their dinner slowly, talking about books and travel and the difference between Maine lobster and regular lobster. David told her about his photography work, how he specialized in wedding portraits but secretly preferred taking pictures of landscapes and old buildings. "There's something honest about a building that's been standing for 200 years, he said. "It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." Lisa understood exactly what he meant. After dinner, they walked through the old Port District. The streets were narrow and lined with brick buildings that looked like they belonged in a history book. Street musicians played on corners, and couples walked hand in hand past bookstores and coffee shops that were still open despite the late hour. "It's beautiful here," Lisa said, surprised by how safe she felt walking around a strange city at night. With Michael, going anywhere after dark had always been a source of anxiety. He would complain about the cold, or the crowds, or the expense, until Lisa learned to suggest staying home instead. "It grows on you," David agreed. "I've lived here my whole life, and I still find new things to love about it." They paused outside a small bookstore with a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. Lisa found herself staring at it. "You could ask about it," David suggested gently. "I know the owner. She's always looking for people who actually love books, not just people who need a job." "I don't have a resume," Lisa said. "I don't have references. I haven't worked in 8 years." "So, you have experience teaching, which means you're good with people. You obviously love reading. And you're starting fresh, which means you'll actually care about doing a good job." Lisa pressed her face closer to the window, peering inside at the shelves of books and the cozy reading chairs scattered throughout the store. It looked like the kind of place she would have spent hours browsing in her old life. "What if she says no?" Lisa asked. "What if she says yes?" David countered. They walked back to the bed and breakfast in comfortable silence, Lisa's mind spinning with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. Maybe she didn't need to run all the way to Oregon to start over. Maybe sometimes starting over meant staying in the unexpected place where you'd landed and making the best of it. At the front door of the inn, David turned to her. "Lisa, I want you to know something. You don't owe me anything for today. I helped because I wanted to, not because I expect anything in return. Tomorrow, if you want to catch that flight to Oregon, I'll drive you to the airport and wish you well. If you want to stay and see what Portland, Maine has to offer, I'll help with that too. But it's your choice. No pressure, no expectations." Lisa looked at this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed him most. A stranger who had shown her more kindness in one day than she'd received in years of marriage. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "Thank you for trusting me," he replied. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a new day, and you get to decide what it looks like." As Lisa climbed the stairs to her room, she realized that for the first time in years, she was actually excited about tomorrow. She didn't know what would happen next, but for once that felt like an adventure rather than a threat. Maybe getting on the wrong plane had been the first right thing she'd done in a very long time. 3 months later, Lisa stood behind the counter of Turning Page's bookstore, organizing the new arrivals that had come in that morning. The late October sun streamed through the big front windows, casting warm light across the carefully arranged displays of bestsellers and local authors. She still couldn't quite believe this was her life now. The bookstore owner, Helen, had hired her that very first day after David introduced them. Helen was a woman in her 50s who had opened the store after her own divorce, understanding exactly what it meant to start over from scratch. "I don't need to see a resume," Helen had said, after talking with Lisa for just 10 minutes. "I can tell you love books, and that's more important than experience. Besides, everyone deserves a second chance." The job came with something even more valuable than a paycheck. There was a small apartment above the store that Helen had been trying to rent for months. It was tiny, just 1 bedroom and a kitchen that was barely bigger than a closet. But it had tall windows and built-in bookshelves, and Lisa had fallen in love with it immediately. "You can work off part of the rent," Helen had offered. "Stay late to help with inventory, open up on weekend mornings, that sort of thing. I've been looking for someone reliable anyway." Now, 3 months later, Lisa had keys to her own place, money in a bank account that only she could access, and a life that belonged entirely to her. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. The little bell above the door chimed, and David walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop down the street. This had become their routine. He would stop by in the afternoons when his photography schedule allowed, and they would talk about books, about the customers who came in, about anything and everything. "How was the photo shoot?" Lisa asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Good. Wedding photos at Fort Gorges. The bride wanted dramatic shots with the ocean in the background." David leaned against the counter, looking comfortable and relaxed. "What about you? Busy day?" Mrs. Patterson came in looking for another romance novel. I recommended 3 different ones, and she bought them all. And that teenager who's been coming in after school finally worked up the courage to ask about the writing workshop we're starting next month. "You're really going to do it, the workshop?" Lisa nodded, excitement bubbling up in her voice. "Helen thinks it's a great idea. Tuesday evenings, teaching basic writing skills to anyone who wants to learn. We already have 8 people signed up." This was something new, something that had grown out of conversations with customers who mentioned wanting to write but not knowing where to start. Lisa had suggested it to Helen, who immediately gave her permission to use the store after hours. "It's like teaching, but different," Lisa explained. "These are adults who want to learn, not kids who have to be there. They're choosing to come." David smiled, the same warm expression she'd grown to love over the past few months. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully. David never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He understood that she needed time to remember who she was before she could figure out who she wanted to become. "Speaking of choosing," David said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This came to my address today." Lisa's heart skipped. She had given David's address to her lawyer in Colorado, since she hadn't wanted Michael to know where she was actually living. The envelope had official markings, and she knew what it had to be before she opened it. Her divorce papers. Finalized. "It's over," she whispered, staring at the legal document that officially ended her marriage to Michael. "It's really over." "How does that feel?" David asked gently. Lisa thought about it for a moment. 3 months ago, she would have expected to feel scared or guilty or somehow responsible for the failure of her marriage. But now, looking at the papers that legally freed her from Michael's control, she felt only relief. "Like I can finally breathe," she said. The bell chimed again, and Amy walked through the door. Lisa's college roommate had flown out from Oregon the week before to visit, curious to meet the friend who had accidentally ended up on the opposite coast but seemed happier than she'd been in years. Amy had been skeptical at first, worried that Lisa was just running from one situation to another, but after spending time with her, seeing how she'd built a new life from nothing, Amy had to admit that maybe the wrong plane had taken Lisa exactly where she needed to go. "I brought lunch," Amy announced, holding up a bag from the deli next door. "Helen said I could steal you for an hour." The three of them sat in the back corner of the bookstore, near the children's section where Helen had set up a small seating area with comfortable chairs and a coffee table. Lisa watched Amy and David chatting easily, two of the most important people in her new life getting along perfectly. "I have to admit," Amy said, "when you first told me what happened, I thought you were crazy. Flying to the wrong state, staying with people you'd just met. But seeing you now..." She paused, studying Lisa's face. "You look like yourself again, like the person you were in college, before everything got complicated." Lisa knew what Amy meant. She felt like herself again, too. She woke up in the morning excited about her day instead of anxious about what might go wrong. She made decisions based on what she wanted, not on what would avoid conflict. She had opinions about movies and books and what to have for dinner. "I never thanked you properly," Lisa said to David. "For that first day, you didn't have to help me. You could have just minded your own business. My mom always said that kindness isn't really kindness unless you give it to people who can't do anything for you in return," David replied. "Besides, you've more than returned the favor." "How?" "You reminded me that good things can come from unexpected places. That sometimes the best adventures start with what looks like a mistake." Amy raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To wrong planes and right people." "To second chances," David added. "To finding out you're braver than you thought you were," Lisa finished. That evening, after Amy had gone back to her hotel and David had headed home to edit photos, Lisa sat in her apartment above the bookstore. She could hear the occasional car passing on the street below and the distant sound of waves against the harbor. Her laptop was open on her tiny kitchen table, and she was working on the curriculum for her writing workshop. Her phone buzzed with a text message. For just a moment, her old instincts kicked in, and she felt that familiar flutter of anxiety. But when she looked at the screen, it was just Helen asking if she could open the store early tomorrow for a special delivery. Lisa texted back that she'd be happy to, then set the phone aside and returned to her work. She was creating lesson plans about finding your voice, about writing stories that matter, about having the courage to put your truth on paper. 6 months ago, she had been a woman too scared to voice her own opinions, too beaten down to remember what she wanted from life. Now she was preparing to teach other people how to find their voices and tell their stories. The irony wasn't lost on her. She pulled out a notebook and started writing, not lesson plans this time, but her own story. The story of a woman who thought she was running away but was actually running toward something better. A woman who got on the wrong plane and found the right life. Sometimes, she wrote, the best journeys begin with what looks like the biggest mistake. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find out where you really belong. Outside her window, Portland, Maine went about its evening business. People walked home from dinner. Couples strolled hand in hand along the harbor. Teenagers gathered in small groups outside the ice cream shop that stayed open late during tourist season. Lisa had never planned to be part of this community, this life, But sitting in her own apartment, surrounded by books and plans and possibilities, she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was David. Looking forward to tomorrow's writing workshop planning session. Want to grab breakfast first? Lisa smiled as she typed back. Yes, and David? Thank you for helping me find my way home. Thank you for letting me be part of the journey. Lisa closed her laptop and looked around her small apartment. Home. Such a simple word, but for years it had meant fear and walking on eggshells and never knowing what mood would greet her when she walked through the door. Now it meant safety, and choice and the freedom to be exactly who she was. She had gotten on the wrong plane, but somehow she had landed in exactly the right place. And tomorrow, she would wake up ready for whatever came next, knowing that she was finally, truly free to write her own story,